Recording started and we're now ready to roll. So the topic today is the post-CentOS 8 era, a community discussion. So yeah, we're looking to engage with you folks, the HPC systems facing community, to discuss where we're all at now with regards to CentOS 8, now that it's reached its end of life. We're hoping for this to be a lively discussion, so we do encourage folks to unmute themselves and answer the questions live in the chat, or sorry, not in the chat, but in the call itself when you feel so inclined. Of course, if you don't have audio capabilities, we will do our best to capture the questions being asked in the chat and bring them forward to the live call. So to get started, we have the results from the survey that we sent around in the lead up to this call today. And Jim Lewis is going to take it away here with regards to summarizing a bit of what we captured in that survey.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Sounding perfect. Okay,
great. So hopefully you can see my screen and not see the outrageous number of tabs that are in every Chrome OS window. So thanks for answering the survey. We got about 48 responses so far, which is terrific. And since it's only been out there like less than a week, so thank you very much for that. And in case you're still interested in answering it, and we wish you would, if you haven't answered it yet, I'm going to keep it open till about midnight, or 11:59 on next Thursday. I'll close it then, and then I'll actually summarize the results based on all of our answers, and I'll also give you some of the cross tabs that we can do inside Qualtrics. So today is just kind of a preliminary results, but based on, I think, the preponderance of answers that we'll get today. So just going on to the survey, and then Brian or somebody will repost it in the meeting notes. It might already be in there, and so you can do it. Please, I encourage you to do it if you haven't done it already. So the first question was, what are your roles and responsibilities? And I think, as expected, because this is the systems facing group, most of us are, OS and system administration, hardware and infrastructure, but there was actually a surprising number, at least to me, of people that are in user support. So that was interesting too. And that may influence, sort of getting a survey of who's actually participating in these calls might slightly change the way we think about future topics, I think. Here's the question. So this is the questions over here is, what distributions were you using in 2020 when the announcement of the CentOS end of life was? And as expected, most of the people that filled out the survey, CentOS was the top one, significant Red Hat, and then Ubuntu was in third. And remember that this wasn't only the question, the way the question was worded is, it's not only what's in use in HPC, but also research and research computing and data. So RCD work, not just HPC work. So that's why you'd expect to see things like Ubuntu and Debian there. Okay. Obviously, most of the people that answered it because it did alter, the announced change from CentOS to CentOS Stream did alter the way they were thinking about future distributions. And I think when we'll take a look at what's in place now, that a good deal of you haven't made the final decision yet, okay? So why do I say that? Well, I'll come back to that one in a minute when we show what people are using now. But I think the good thing was that if the the announcement affected your future plans, sort of describe the level of the effect. And of the 42 people that responded that it altered the way they was thinking about things, it was really minimal to moderate. So I think that's fairly positive in terms of our community. Nobody, well, actually one person was really had significant problems with it. But I think it's probably good that most people are seeing it as sort of a minimal or moderate effect. So here's when we take a look at the, what distributions are in use of your institution today to support research and data, or research computing and data, or HPC. And this one just barely fits on the screen, I think. But again, Red Hat is about the same, Ubuntu is about the same, but there's still a significant number of people that are using the end of life CentOS. And then we also, like Brian and Matthew and I were talking ahead of time, and if you could look at the results and redo the questions and restart the survey over again, you would be better informed. But we probably should have put the fact that CentOS 7 isn't end of life yet, but so as one of the choices. But some of the people that said other actually put that in there. Well, I'm still using CentOS 7, but that's not end of life yet. So given the results here, of the 37 folks that were using CentOS at the beginning, 27 are still using CentOS. I would say that a good majority of you haven't really made the final decision. But I would say also on the sort of positive thing is that Rocky made gains. 8 of the 42 who answered are starting to use Rocky. Alma less so, but there's still 3 of the 42. And obviously Red Hat still has a significant presence. In fact, the numbers for Red Hat really haven't changed between 2020 and 2022. So the final question is the final question that we're going to review is sort of that, looking out before the announcement, what is the impact it's made into the community? And this was a little bit of a mixed bag, but I think the real positive out of this is that 25 of 42 people said that the new choices such as Alma and Rocky represent healthier and more independent community enterprise Linux alternatives than CentOS did. And I think that's a really positive statement. And hopefully some of that, some of you that are willing to share coming up will reflect that sentiment. The other side is, this will negatively impact the support for projects that you will have to spend more time, validating the environments, whether to opt out or support those environments. And I completely understand that sentiment too. For some of you, it is a significant change. You have skills in certain areas, your teams have skills in certain areas, and now you're asked to change things. So I would say, the preponderance of answers, again, were around the positive, the new choices are healthier, and also the negative. 18 of 42 said that this will negatively impact the situation. So those are what I would say the preliminary results based on 48 survey responses, with 42 people saying that they've had to alter their Linux distribution plans as a result of the CentOS announcement. And before I take down the screen sharing, does anybody have any questions or something that I might not have covered that well? Like I said, that what I'll do is after I close the survey, I'll do a more formal report, and we'll put the PDF, either attach it to the notes or send it to the list so people can see how it's going for the, when we get the whole sort of distribution of people answering it. So any questions?
I think we just, if there's questions, I don't want to interrupt those, but I think we'd make the plug. If your site hasn't, or you haven't taken a chance to fill out the poll, we'd still encourage everybody to help fill it out, because we'd like to have the results really be reflective of the community as a whole. And then, as Jim said, he will work on getting all of those summarized up, minus that last question, which is only really relevant for today's meeting, and then shared back with the community.
Yeah, the last question was if you were willing to share to submit your email address, and so very few people did that. However, over half of you said that I would be willing to share, or I'll probably be willing to share, but not commit my email address to it, so we don't put you on the spot right away. So that's it. I'll also have some of the cross tabs that Qualtrics lets you do, and those I think will be interesting in terms of the people that fill negatively or positively and what distributions they chose. I think that would be pretty valuable. So I'll stop talking now, Matthew, and hand it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. So as mentioned, would anybody like to unmute and talk a little bit about how this change has impacted you, perhaps how you've dealt with it already, what your plans are, really anything you can kind of add to this conversation, or really to break the ice and get us going with this topic would be, invited and appreciated. I see somebody has their hand up. Let's see, Paul Edmond from Harvard.
Yep, just to bring up speed of what we're doing. We're mainly here actually to kind of get an idea as to what the community is kind of doing. When the CentOS 8 thing kind of blew up, we were just starting to consider looking at upgrading from CentOS 7. With that blowing up, we've been basically in a waiting pattern, watching what's going on for that. I have recently kicked the tires on Rocky and Alma in terms of standing them up. Both were seamless in terms of doing a VM. But our major breaking point is whether it supports Lustre, InfiniBand, and Slurm. Now, Lustre support seems to be there, at least from my testing. I'm sure other people have done more robust testing. I haven't tested InfiniBand yet, but again, I'm sure others have. So I'm very curious to hear what others who have actually gone further down this path have seen, because we'll be making our decision pretty soon about which way we want to go as well. So very interested in the discussion here, and thanks for hosting this.
Thanks, Paul. Suggest, I see you have your hand up. However, first, is there anybody that has a response directly to what Paul was kind of coring the community about there with regards to Lustre, Slurm, and InfiniBand compatibility, or Suggest perhaps that's what you were looking to speak to also? I see you shaking your head no there. So yeah, does anyone have any follow-up to Paul's?
I was just going to say, I have not tested Lustre. That's not a part of our environment. We use Ceph as our primary file store, so that's not an issue for us. InfiniBand, that would be an issue if we were using Mellanox drivers. However, we've been using kernel drivers, and as such, on our Slurm nodes, we've been using CentOS 8 Stream and tested that out, and it seems to be working pretty well there.
Cool. We've been traditionally using kernel drivers as well. We haven't done it with the Mellanox stuff just because it's such a pain in the butt. So it's good to hear that the kernel drivers are working.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Kyle. And we might circle back, as I know in the you might have some additional information to share. So Suggest, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that for us, we decided to, when they made the announcement, we went and poked at Red Hat, and we were able to get an academic license for our site. So we decided to make a switch to that and have been converting systems. We haven't touched any of the HPC yet. That would be the later ones to be done. But the conversion has been running pretty smoothly. And if anyone out there is able to convince Red Hat to give them the academic discount, which it's quite a process, but it's basically a site-wide license, and it wasn't relatively, for a software license, not that costly for our site for what we're getting. And with it came all the support. So yes, we went from free to paying, but in the end, it's something that's supported. We don't have to worry about packages being supported or anything breaking that we had in place. And we, part of the problem was that we built our newest clusters on CentOS 8, not knowing CentOS was going to, be ended so quickly. So this is going to be helpful to us.
Awesome. Thanks, Sujesh. That's really good feedback around the switch there. So Kyle, I see you have your hand up, and I know you offered to provide some deep insights into how you folks have been handling this change. So please, let us know. Oh, sorry, you're I believe
I'm muted. Whoops. Sorry. No, we were heavy duty into testing. We were all ready to jump over to CentOS 8 whenever they made this announcement and made us do some backpedaling. So we've got certain classes of things that we've done different things with. For our compute nodes right now, we're still on CentOS 7. We are probably going to go to stream, like I said, now that we've tested everything out. We aren't nearly as jumpy to go as we were before, but we will probably do that within the next year or so for the compute nodes. For our infrastructure, we're doing a combination of things. We're using CentOS 8 stream for most of it at this point. We have our Ceph nodes we moved to CentOS 8 stream back from CentOS 8 because we were already moved all the way over there. We do have a class of machines that we are using Rocky on. We've kind of thrown our hat in that ring for the stuff that needs to have some higher level of support than I think we're going to get out of stream. And to me, it just seemed with the history of the project with Rocky and their history of people that they have working on it, that seemed to be our best bet. So that's where we've thrown our pearls before them in this case. So that's the option we did. We did look at Alma, which was a serious consideration. We looked at Oracle, which was a serious consideration. Oracle leaves a bad taste in our mouth because we were one of the SGE users before when Sun was using it. And then they told us they could, we could continue using as Oracle Grid Engine if for the paltry sum of $1 million a year, which was several times our annual budget for everything. So we tend not to trust Oracle very far, but we still did look that direction. But like I said, we ended up casting our nets toward Rocky just because of the history of the people involved with that.
Matthew, if you could just interrupt for a second. When people say we, could you identify your university or whatever?
Yeah, sorry, I'm at Kansas State University. We have a medium-sized cluster, 350 nodes, 10,000 cores-ish sort of thing.
Awesome. Thanks, Kyle. And thank you, Jim, for the reminder there. So before we move on and ask, other folks to chime with their experience, are there any questions for Kyle around, how they handled that testing and transition that he just highlighted? And I encourage you to unmute and go ahead and ask.
I guess the question I had is, what sort of hitches did you run into during the upgrade process? Was it smooth for you, or did you run into any real deal breakers as you went through that took some work?
Did it again. Upgrading is not a problem at all. The issue was I had a couple machines that I ran into. I'm trying to think of what the issue even was that I decided I wanted to downgrade again, and that was a reinstall. Because there was, once you step up to version 8, there was no going back to 7. It was a test box anyway. I remember, I know what the project was. I don't remember what the hitch was that we decided to look at, but going back down was an issue, whereas going up was not at all.
And just to be clear, your upgrade here, you were upgrading from 7 to stream, not from an 8 in between to stream.
Correct.
That actually relates. I have a question of my own, Kyle, if you don't mind. For testing, did you test, the transition per se, or did you start with maybe a fresh install to see, what it would look like on your hardware and go from there?
We do stateless on our compute nodes, so it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference one way or the other. We all boot from Pixie Image. And that's what we did, is we just tested those Pixie images and made sure they all worked on all our hardware. We have not tested all of our applications yet, but we've gotten the biggest chunk of them tested and ready to go for 8 when we make that jump.
Awesome, thanks. Are there any more questions for Kyle, or I'll invite other folks to jump in with their experiences also? Alastair Neil, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi.
And
We actually
sorry
can you-
to interrupt you. Can you please let us know what university you're representing?
certainly, yeah, George Mason University in Virginia. I was just going to say we have had a site license for a number of years for Red Hat, so it really wasn't. I mean, we always have had the option of going to Red Hat if we want, and we have run Red Hat historically on some systems, but due to a combination of internal politics that we didn't have control over the site license, we had to go cap in hand to our central IT, basically, to get systems registered and get allocations. They were very parsimonious. I think they were scared because they were dragged kicking and screaming into getting a site license, and they were concerned that at some point, you know, it would become terribly popular. People would install hundreds of systems, and then Red Hat would jack the prices up, and they would be over a barrel. So it was an incredibly tedious project every time we needed a new channel in the Red Hat network, satellite server, or you know, if we wanted some other new package, and it just became a real barrier to productivity for getting stuff done. So we actually generally use CentOS on our actual systems. So when the change came, you know, we discussed moving entirely to Red Hat, but frankly, it's even without the problems with our IT department and getting channels configured and getting access to the required software channels, it's a pain because it really doesn't integrate well with a lot of the open source repos out there that you need, and it just makes everything just that bit more effort to do than CentOS or the open source available. So we're primarily switching to Rocky Linux at the moment. We've still got a bunch of systems that are on Stream or have been migrated to Stream. We've got our old cluster, which is still Red Hat 7. Our new cluster started out as a combination of Red Hat 8 and CentOS 8 and actually Ubuntu, because we had a DGX from NVIDIA. We've just recently reinstalled that, so now everything is either CentOS 8 Stream, Red Hat Linux, or Rocky. Our new nodes, as they're being rolled out, are coming out in Rocky. We'll gradually go back and reimage the original nodes with Rocky 2. The DGXs we're leaving as Red Hat simply because we're uncertain what the support will be from NVIDIA if we decide to switch them to Rocky. So for now, they're going to remain Red Hat, but they will probably be the only systems that will be true Red Hat. And that's where we're at.
Thanks so much, Alastair. Is there anyone that has a question to
Yeah,
Alastair's experience?
especially if anyone knows how NVIDIA treat Red Hat clones for their support, I'd be interested to hear.
Does anyone have any follow-up? I'll ask you to go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just had a question for Alastair. So so you represent the HPC part of George Mason, and that's different from the sort of IT version?
It's complicated. We're research computing, and technically our office is a joint report to ITS, our IT department, and to the VP for research. So we sort of fall between two stools. We rely on ITS for a lot of our system support, and we also have a department. I'm actually in the department that's not part of ITS. I'm part of the Provost office, and I'm a researcher facing position predominantly, but I still have a lot to do with the system side.
Thanks.
Awesome. Any further questions for Alastair? Or, an answer to his question about the DGX box compatibility?
Yeah, I'd be interested if anyone's got any insight.
Not seeing anyone there, but I imagine, Alastair, if folks do have any DGX information, they can feel free to ping you afterward.
Yeah, or if they got any questions about DGXs in Red Hat, then you can ask them.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that. So the next question we have is in the chat, and it's a very general question around from Matthew Peterson around the rough academic costs for these licensed Linux distributions such as Red Hat, Ubuntu, and if it's typically per node or per core. I'm not sure, Matthew, if you feel like unmuting and maybe elaborating a little bit more on your question.
Oh, that's fine. We're running a wide variety, mostly 7, stream for 8. We have a lot of IBM Power stuff that's running that. Campus has a lot of siloed departments in terms of research computing, and there's no consensus on campus across all the divisions about where people are going. And one thing that was been floated is like, can UIT Central come in and just squash this? Could they get an Uber license and cover engineering and biology and everyone? But what would the general cost be if you got a huge Red Cap license or a huge Ubuntu license, or would we be bankrupt, or is it feasible?
I think I can speak a little to that. I don't really, I wasn't involved in it. Our IT department is the ones who negotiated our site license, and I don't believe it's based on a number of systems per se. I think it's something to do with FTEs on campus. But I remember having heard them complain about it enough, I know that they were a little bit surprised at the price. The original price was pretty competitive, but then we got a big bump after a couple of years, and I think that made them very nervous. I think it's running as around in the neighborhood of 50 to 60,000 a year for an academic site license that includes a lot of stuff apart from Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It also includes, I believe, OpenStack and Rev. It doesn't include Ceph for some reason, but it does include open storage, so cluster FS and things like that.
Awesome. Thanks, Alastair, and thanks for the question, Matthew.
And we're pretty big, or George Mason is the largest public university in Virginia, so we're a big organization.
Yeah, thank you. The other thing I wondered, and I understand the echoing of people worrying about Oracle. I know we have an Oracle site license. I don't know how far it extends, but we run ZFS on Solaris, and the tech support license, in my opinion, is absolutely dirt cheap. And then you can call like a ZFS engineer and get support, which is world class. And I'm just wondering if that type of site license for academic institutions extends to Oracle Linux. Like, could we get really dirt cheap Oracle Linux? And I don't know the question or the answer to that.
Yeah, I know sometimes it has to do with, both if you have an institutional agreement, regional agreements, etc. I know folks that have leveraged regional consortiums to negotiate better pricing also. Okay, thanks so much, Matthew. So we'll move on to a question from Ben Rushholm. Ben, can you please unmute and let us know what university you're representing, or institution rather?
Hi, I'm Ben Rushholm. I work at Caltech, but not in the HPC Center. I work for a department called IPAC, and we run a number of project-specific SLAM clusters. So, just a slightly different perspective. So Caltech does have a site license. So we're currently running CentOS 7, and we're planning on moving to RHEL. We're actually probably going to skip 8 simply because of the timing. We're looking at going from 7 straight to 9. And I just wanted to highlight there's a specific RHEL product. I don't know if people have heard of RPM OS tree and immutable images, but that's included in the RHEL academic license. So we're looking at building, there's an included image builder, and we're going to be we're testing this right now with RHEL 8 of building these immutable OS images there's transactional updates and you can roll back. The product's called RHEL for Edge. There's various versions. It all comes originally from Core OS, which was bought by Red Hat. So that's our plan. And I know that RPM OS tree is just OS tree, and RPM OS tree is the Red Hat version is growing in popularity, and there is going to be eventually a CentOS Stream version, which is kind of our fallback if licensing becomes expensive, because it'll help us gate CentOS Stream updates, so we can test them in a reliable manner.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing, Ben. Does anybody have any questions for Ben? And I'll encourage you to unmute and go ahead and ask.
So another question is if anyone from Open HPC is here, because we use that product as well, I assume they're going to stick with, putting on Stream or RHEL for version 9.
Not sure if I'm the only member of the technical steering committee, but I am a member of that, and officially it's agnostic. So any RHEL variant is being supported as.
Sorry, I think we lost Jason there for a second.
Sorry, it's really windy here. I'm on the technical steering committee, any RHEL variant, okay? Did that make it?
Okay. Is there a timeline for 9? I mean, sort of 6 months after release, or?
Not that I've heard of. I
Right.
didn't even realize 9 existed, so.
It's out very soon. I mean,
Okay.
CentOS Stream 9 is out now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll bring it to the next meeting.
So I guess the question, since 9 was brought up, what is the major difference between 8 and 9? So what's the major turnover other than the kernel version?
I mean, for CentOS Stream, it's a huge difference just in terms of the way it's built. So 8, it was something of an interim step. So with 9, all the back end is much more tightly integrated. I mean, I don't think there are headline figures. I forgot the exact kernel. It's a 5-point-something kernel, GCC 11, I think. Just updates to everything. But a big one is we'll finally have 2038 file system support. So if you have long-running systems, they won't crash when we come to the Unix rollover.
Excellent. Thanks, Ben. Does anybody have any further questions for Ben, or is there anyone who's looking to come forward with some of their experiences and how they've handled the CentOS 8 change? And again, if you don't have audio capabilities, please do feel free to ask your question in the chat, and we will translate to the live session here.
I guess I'd offer to share where we're at here at University of Utah.
Thanks, Brian.
We went into kind of a holding pattern as others have shared. When the original announcement came out, we were at that point in works of cooking up a CentOS 8 recipe. We were primarily a CentOS shop at that point, CentOS 7 as the production flavor. So as we paused, and Alma and Rocky efforts were both announced, we started exploring, bits about both of these. without really a whole lot of opinion either direction. As time moved forward, I think what we started seeing is that Alma got out first and gained a lot of popularity with a few projects. And so within our group, it was kind of our networking people that seemed to find projects that made lots of inroads with Alma really quickly. And it seemed to kind of be that Alma was at that moment winning the race. This is a little bit before Rocky got their GA release out. But then as Rocky came out, we found them very equivalent from our own internal testing. And so we actually kind of have concluded that we're agnostic a bit to either or. But if you kind of look at how we're applying that, we are predominantly choosing Rocky for our HPC and our CD core services, with this idea that Alma can be the right one to put in where you might go in and drop in some of like the perf sonar and various other network focused things, because those projects, naturally you're supporting those, because we feel like then the admin skill sets are going to be virtually transparent between those different choices. We didn't give a whole lot of thought to Red Hat, predominantly because we had been a Red Hat back in the Red Hat 4, 5, 6 era customer, and they, putting it nicely, chased us away due to price increases. So it would be challenging for us to feel confident to go back to that, even if we saw a great price tag right now. And we were really quite pleased with the CentOS solution. So we kind of just wanted to find ourselves back to that. So we're at the point now where we're just about to deploy the first Rocky 8 in production. We have a Rocky 8 test cluster running with our user services people, running the gambit on all the applications, making sure that everything's good. And hopefully within the next month, we'll announce the first production cluster going live to it.
Excellent. Thanks, Brian. Does anybody have any questions for Brian? See, there's another net new question in the chat, but maybe we'll see if there's any follow-ups to Brian's experiences first. If there are, I ask you to unmute.
Let's put a little context on Adam Michael, University of Arizona. I was in some of the early Rocky community meetings, and my understanding is that they tried to reach out to Alma and bring those two projects together, and that was not something the Alma folks were interested in, and that made me a little bit concerned about what the value proposition is for Alma, why they wanted to maintain their own thing there and not get into that sort of community integration. I don't think there's a ton of value, like you said, in terms of the difference between the two distros. So I'm not trying to talk anybody off of or onto any teams here, just more of that was a thing that I was paying attention to early at that time and thinking, I don't understand why those two groups don't want to work together in terms of pulling those things together. And I don't know if that informs anyone else's decisions, but that certainly informed some of my thinking about trying to lean back into the more Rocky end of it, because they were just really leaning into the community and trying to reignite essentially the old CentOS project in a lot of ways. And it just felt like a natural home for these things to gravitate together to me. So, and I will say also, Brian's experience with Red Hat and pricing happened exactly to us. Also, we were a site license customer for Red Hat, and they turned our prices up to an extent that we could no longer afford site licenses. We had to go back to choosing, and this is when I was still on the enterprise team, choosing individual systems to have licensed Red Hat. That was after we had put a campus site license out and told people to feel free to use Red Hat Enterprise on any of your own systems departments. You can count on us to keep this license around. Not anything we could have predicted. Again, exactly the same story. The pricing terms we had had for a long time were very good. It didn't seem like there was any reason to expect they were going to turn so bad, but they turned bad pretty fast. So I'm I would say I'm in the same boat as you are in terms of thinking about, even if Red Hat would give me a great price to get back onto the Red Hat train, I don't know how to believe that long term in the post IBM era, I guess I would say, when they're leaning into their fiscal duties maybe more strongly.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, can you please remind us what university you're based out of?
I'm sorry, University of Arizona.
Thanks. And related to the Rocky Linux piece that you brought up, Kyle Hudson had brought up an issue he ran into with Globus. However, I see that Brian, you had offered some information there about how you folks have handled it, and that you did run into a problem you were able to work around with the install script.
So Alan, I think hit the key thing is that the Globus group has been getting feedback, I think, from a lot of customers. So I think there is support coming for some of the newer distribution flavors, but the install challenge we ran into seems to be tied to text string matching, looking for rel CentOS wording and not handling Rocky or Alma. So we actually have it running on a number of Rocky 8 boxes here that one of the other guys that I work with was able to kind of work past with a little tweaking. That doesn't put you in the official supported category at this point, but it does put you in the working category.
Awesome, thanks, Brian. And I think that's probably relevant, as I imagine a lot of folks here leverage Globus for data transfer. So Matthew Peterson, again, you had an interesting question about how folks, or if folks have had to deal with a top-down campus mandate. Would you be comfortable or available to unmute and elaborate on that a little bit?
Just to read it again, and I think this comes back to the idea, our institution is very siloed and forked, and everyone's doing their own thing. And I think some institutions, including ours, kind of have a business mindset that let's do scales of economy, bring everything in-house. You can still have distributed groups, but let's all get on the same page and talk to each other. And to that end, is it realistic or feasible, or is anyone doing this where campus IT has the political clout to come in and say, everyone is going to run distro X. We've had working committees, we've formalized it, we're going to support it. You can talk to another coworker in a different department and they'll have the similar experiences. We'll have a central knowledge base. If you need an exception, you can file for one. But whether it's licensed or unlicensed, does it make sense? Is that kind of a pie in the sky thing, and politics and unique requirements are so large that it just does not happen? Is it a good aspirational goal? I guess is my question.
Yeah, does anybody have any experiences or thoughts? Jim?
Yeah, my response was just that I think that would be very difficult for us to do, so we have all sorts of departments, department level research, PI level support, all the way up to, university enterprise IT. And then we also have things like, there's a lot of these research groups that are doing Internet of Things on like Raspberry Pis and stuff like that. So they would probably have to get an exception for some of that research. So I think it would be very difficult to do it as distributed as our university, that's Penn State, is.
I'd add to that a couple thoughts. There have been some statements on our campus, and I'm trying to be appropriately indirect, that certain people view open source as untrustworthy, but a commercial distribution they see is just fine. And I find flaws in that statement for all the obvious reasons that commercial distribution is just as much open source, even though there may be little slices that are not. But we have approached previous situations kind of under the idea that if the central IT or whatever group has a business model requirement to go and have a commercialized distribution to satisfy some requirement, I see zero issues with that. And then what I would like to then think of is that the rest of us as a community could join in on that kind of for the incremental costs, meaning they had to have it to satisfy their business. So let them carry the lion's share of that initial investment. And then if these other people can piggyback on, you look at the incremental costs of bringing them in, and the problem we run into, I think, that we've seen happen in our institution is people maybe are willing to think about that day one, but day end down the road, they forget that and they want to go back and say, oh no, you have it installed on your HPC clusters, which usually is the biggest number. You should pay the lion's share, and they want to redistribute that back. And then you're like, well, I could have run on the free version, and and this kind of creates this circular problem. So it's hard to approach.
Yeah, I concur with that. At our university, we have a central cluster that we manage. And it's a traditional HPC. So we dictate what Linux distribution we run on it. However, we offer some support for the wider community. And yeah, we wouldn't be in a position to dictate what distribution they use. We can certainly make our recommendations and folks tend to follow. But as far as a mandate goes, I think that would be very difficult. And at least in our environment, might be seen on infringing upon academic freedom to some degree. Does anyone else have any experiences they want to share? Go ahead, Brian.
So I don't want to preempt if other people have experience they'd like to share, but one of the questions that we threw out in the poll, I'd love to kind of fish for people's thoughts on that. This was kind of like the question that kind of shaped around the, now that we are where we are at, how do we feel this has impacted the community? And this is one that gave us the choices of like we're more fragmented, or that these additional choices, better represent the community. There are better enterprise choices, or CentOS Stream, better represents Red Hat interests. I'm curious if anybody, what strong opinions people have in that direction. Maybe to kind of, put my own foot in my mouth, or, that's not the right way to say it, put my own foot forward here. I look at this as a generally positive motion, because I see this as CentOS was always, to me, a little bit of a conflict of interest in the way that it was, with Red Hat kind of being at the helm of it for the last number of years. I see CentOS Stream being more positive for what Red Hat wants, even though this whole disruption was very much a disruption. I can appreciate what they're trying to do. So I look at this as a relatively awkward, painful, but net positive benefit. And I guess I'm hopeful that kind of having these two choices of Alma and Rocky, being that both of them are trying to be a bit for bit, bug for bug, equivalent of RHEL, hopefully don't bring too much of the negative fragmentation or pain points to projects supporting them. So I'm kind of walking out of this with those kind of sentiments, and I'd love to get other people's thoughts.
And certainly from my perspective, I would agree with that sentiment, although I think it's still too early to tell with Alma and Rocky. They just don't have the track record as of right now. I do agree. It was always weird when Red Hat took in CentOS and then Red Hat was absorbed by IBM. That entire thing has just been a weird thing. Certainly has caused us pause when they dropped that entire thing out. But then, yeah, Alma and Rocky, I do see them as healthier options, but I think time will tell as to whether or not that actually bears fruit or not. So I'm looking forward to hopefully longevity of both them. I think in this case, competition is a good thing, and so I would like to see not too many more options, but this many options I think is good and healthy, and we'll see how support goes forward.
My understanding from some of the discussion that was going on in the Rocky chat early on is that CentOS was in a very bad way when Red Hat picked them up, that they were on the verge of collapsing, that the project was going to dissolve. There was no time to put into it. There was no money involved, and Red Hat saved CentOS, essentially, is the pitch. And they felt happy, as I understand it, when CentOS was saved by Red Hat, and then slowly saw Red Hat changing CentOS into a different thing. And that's when a lot of the kind of founding members of that checked out. But for a long time, obviously, I think all of us would agree, CentOS ran exactly the way we would want that project to run. It was doing what we wanted it to do, and Red Hat was supporting it doing that. It definitely feels like the IBM transition is what spun some of these dials around to making that into something that potentially helps them out as opposed to helping the community out, right? I don't disagree with the statement that the stream method serves Red Hat better. They want a way to test integration before they go to release. We don't want to test integration, in our systems. We want the release. We just don't need the support necessarily. And so I understand how it fits with their models. Just the way they handled that transition was so ham-fisted and awful that it really gives you well, I shouldn't say you. I don't want to imply anybody else's feelings, but it gives me a lot of pause thinking about what Red Hat thinks of me and what IBM thinks of me as a person who is using CentOS, and why I would want to be their customer if that's kind of the way they're thinking about it, right? I mean, we're in academia and they're aiming at enterprise money, so I can understand how they have a different, kind of, what do you call it, target acquisition strategy that maybe doesn't suit the kind of budget I can spend. So maybe that's just the reality of it. But that kind of dovetails back into that previous question of, what if Red Hat would give you a great deal? Would you be willing to get back on board with Red Hat IBM? Like, it'd be really hard to take that option. I don't understand personally how I could feel like Red Hat wants my business really anymore. I'm not the person they want to support anymore. Our institution and the kind of things we want to do with it, certainly in HPC, they don't want to support us like that. They want to support somebody that has money. And that's fine. I understand what business is. But at the same time, seeing some of the discussion of how it spun in last time, from, obviously with Rocky, you have a little bit of the benefit of Greg Kurtzer's in there just like telling the story. When this happened before, this is how it happened, and this is the things we went into, and I don't want to see any of that happen again. So these are all the things I'm doing with Rocky to make sure none of this goes this way again. This is how we got into set up the foundation and boards of, whatever directors. I'm just, using, random language here that came up in the discussion, but just things he was thinking to himself. The way Red Hat ended up turning CentOS was because we didn't set it up the way I think we should set it up now. Looking back in hindsight, these are all the ways I want to do the thing. And that was kind of informative in terms of sort of feeling like they were taking Rocky in a direction that felt like it was community focused, like really community focused, and not just accidentally, I guess, community focused.
Yeah, thanks very much for sharing your opinion on that, Adam. Much appreciated. And as Jim pointed out, we do have the survey link there in the chat for those who haven't filled it out yet. This has been a really engaging and thought-provoking discussion, I believe. I hope the rest of you feel the same. It's been awesome to kind of hear how both the institutions you represent as well as you yourselves have been dealing with the change and some of your experiences with it. I'll defer to my colleagues if there's any Cole's notes we want to provide before we end the call and allow everyone to get back to the rest of their day.
Just make a plug, as he said, for the poll, and then also near the bottom of the call doc, there is a section. If you have any suggestions for a future call topic, feel free to type a suggestion in. We love to have those as we make plans for future months.
Yeah, and I'd just like to thank the 17 people that seem to have filled it in during this call, filled the survey in. Thank you very much.
And yeah, thanks again for everybody that chimed in and participated, and for everyone for joining. Thanks, y'all, and have a great day.
Thank you.